Three, two. Oh, we're already on live, darn. I think it says we're live. Yes, we're live. Hello, everybody. It's not 7 o'clock yet. This is the 2 minutes of us goofing around where Dr. Gallus is going to say something conspiracy or controversial that's going to get him thrown out of Iowa State.
There will not be severe weather tomorrow. How about that?
If it rains all day, there probably won't be severe weather tomorrow.
Right, that always seems to
Everything.
happen.
Yeah, we might end up talking about that later in the show when it's like Iowa has a bad rap for having. It's like all the severe weather's in Nebraska, it crosses the Missouri River and then it dies, or it turns into this big rain mass or something. That happens all the time, except this year. This year it seems like Nebraska and Iowa are getting the tornadoes and Oklahoma's getting nothing,
Right,
which is a
although it
little
seems
odd. I think we have more tornadoes in Iowa this year now than Oklahoma, which is kind of sad. Even though Iowa hasn't had that many, because normal for Iowa is 40 or 45, something around there.
right. I think we're up to 37, so we're doing pretty good.
Yeah, which means we're doing bad. Except
Right,
the tornadoes, all of them have been EF2s or lower, so.
right. Nebraska. When you said about, I noticed too. Even this year, the really strong storms and the strong tornadoes do seem to die as they move from Nebraska into Iowa. So Nebraska's had all the big tornadoes. Iowa tends to get these kind of more surprising ones that are generally, weaker.
Or like that one back month or so ago that was 46 miles long on a squall line that was an EF1, which was probably also known as surprising.
Right.
Because we don't get squall line tornadoes to go 40 some miles and it's on the ground that long, and we've complained about it on this program that it wasn't warned for until the end, but that was the only killer one so far we've had this year, is that one.
I
The one
think
that killed
so.
yeah. And it seems like even with the last 2 years when we've had so few tornadoes, I think last year we had a fatality. Or was it 2012? Was that one in Muscatine that killed one person when a tornado came through a oil and lube thing, blew out the garage doors, and the person was swept out of there, and it was only an EF1 or something. I'm thinking, well, an EF1 can kill you. An EF0
Right.
could kill you if a tree lands on your house. But
Yeah, and it seemed to me the person that was killed this year was not in a very good spot. So
yeah, both of them were in barns.
right,
And when we were doing our test yesterday, when I was talking about the big windstorm we had here a week ago Monday, well, when we were driving from Anamosa, where I'm at, to Cedar Rapids, you passed this area. It was this concentrated area, so it made me think it had to be tornadic or a downburst, because it hit this barn, completely destroyed it. They had to pretty much tear the rest of it down. Across the street, across the highway, it was a 4-lane highway. Across the highway, it flipped a semi. Then it went over and tore out all the trees, pretty much maybe about 50 yards to the north of the semi-trailer. And then about 300 yards west of that, shed lost part of its roof, and it lost some, and parts of that house had roof damage. I'm thinking, okay, this is kind of strange. It's not this concentrated, and then it's not concentrated, because then you'd go to the north and there'd be nothing. At
hmm.
least, so it's and that happened here too, where all the damage, the worst damage, was either in Anamosa, was on the west and north side of town. So made me think it was probably downburst winds or something, or a microburst, but it was on a squall line. So, but we could probably talk about that. But I'm already wasting time because we could be starting the show, but we don't have a theme song because every theme that I come up with, my other co-host doesn't like it. So.
Eh,
This is Polygon Issuance number 18. We've made it to 18 issuances or episodes. I don't know how we've made it to 18 of them, and we still have several more to go before we run out of guests again. So I'm one of the lovely co-hosts, Jeff Wilcox, who works as the senior forecaster, even though I'm not old, at the Iowa Weather Network, which is the site that I partially sort of started, even though it's been through mergers and whatnot. So we're here on this lovely Friday, the 11th of July. We've been off for 2 weeks, and in that 2-week time period, let's see, what's happened to me? And I can ask our guest what's happened to him in the last 2 weeks. Well, in the last 2 weeks, I had lightning hit my building. I lost my internet. I had the biggest windstorm in my lifetime hit my hometown of Anamosa, where it knocked out the power, the phone, the cable, the internet, and cell phone coverage was knocked out, which surprised me because that was the first windstorm that I can ever remember where cell phone service was knocked out for a long period of time, where you could not get a signal at all. So that was my wonderful week between having no internet for approximately from Sunday night when that lightning hit my building, which I didn't lose power, surprisingly, from that, to Wednesday when I had to buy a new router, my fourth in 2 years. So I've had a trying week in between that and having tornadoes in everywhere, Traer getting hit by 2 tornadoes, one to the north, one to the south, tornadoes, severe weather, headaches, stress. Our guest probably is used to all this stress. He's Dr. Bill, or William, we'll call him that because then he'll hate us. Gallus from Iowa State University. He's been there since 1995. That makes him like tenured or something. He graduated from, let me see, he graduated from somewhere. Penn State in somewhere, 89, or no, he graduated from Colorado State. Didn't you graduate from Penn State at a time?
Yep, 87.
Yeah, and then you went to Colorado State for your master's, and then your PhD was there also.
Right.
And you were also excuse me, I think you were a fellow of the National Science Foundation, I believe, right?
Right.
Oh, see, I'm good. I'm good at this stuff.
Good memory.
Oh, and you also, I see, had worked at NSEP. Oh, we're gonna have to talk about that. But
Yeah.
we don't have good things about NSEP.
Well,
Because their model site, I have been really getting pretty not too happy with them. They fixed it, but it's driving me a little bit nuts. But so first off, we'd have to ask the wonderful question we asked everybody except for people that don't want to be on this program. What got you interested in the weather in this horrible business of this atmosphere?
I think I'm like a lot of the students that we have, and like most people in meteorology, in that I was born this way. I can't remember a time that I didn't love weather. So when I was 5 or 6, if we were playing tag in the yard and it was 6:15 and I knew the weather guy on the local TV station was about to come on, I'd quit whatever game we were playing and I'd run into the house just to catch the weather. When I was 7, I started keeping a weather diary, so I pretty much have done that almost every day of my life since I was 7, so that's a long time. So really, there was never a time in my life that I didn't know that I wanted to study meteorology.
And where was it that you grew up in this lovely
Well,
place?
and that kind of helped because I am from a place in Pennsylvania called Johnstown, so I don't know if you've heard, if you know.
Oh dear.
So I mean,
So you've had the flood, the
right.
second one.
You grow up in a place where part of the lore, you would see in funeral homes, they had the handwritten notes from the 1889 flood when the 2,000 people were killed. And when I was young, we had banks and dry cleaners in places called the Flood-Free City or Flood-Free Savings and Loan, because after the second big flood in 1936, FDR put concrete in the river channels. They dug them like 20-some feet deep, and they thought the city would never flood again. And of course, you might be familiar, in 1977, when I was 12, we had a MCS, which was pretty rare in Pennsylvania. An MCS kind of sat overhead all night long. We had about 10 to 12 inches of rain. It's a very mountainous area, and so that water all ran down into the city, and so like another 85 people were killed. So that was one of my biggest memories as a kid, is waking up at 4 a.m. seeing the lights of a fire truck because one of our neighbors' basements had collapsed because the hillside was turning into mud, and being told that Johnstown flooded. And when you're a kid, that you knew Johnstown could never flood again, and you're being told it had actually flooded. So that was a pretty amazing event.
And I assume that's what got some of your research involved, because I know we'll get into that, but with the precipitation and whatnot. So
Right.
So what other weather events before you went to college do you remember besides flooding?
Well, the cool thing about Johnstown, if you know where it is, it's about 2 hours east of Pittsburgh. It has the highest elevation airport in Pennsylvania, so it sits on really in some of the fairly high mountains of the Appalachians, which means it gets lake effect snow in the winter. It gets the nor'easters that go up the East Coast. It has cold air damming in the winter, so it gets ice storms. My house was on a hillside that faced to the west, so I had a nice view of a mountain ridge about 20 miles away, and I also had a perfect viewing angle for thunderstorms that would be rolling in from that direction. So, ironically, I started that weather diary 2 weeks before Hurricane Agnes hit Pennsylvania. So, that was a pretty unusual event with tremendous rain. We actually had high temperatures in the upper 40s when Agnes was going on because it merged with a cold core low. So this is, mid-June, having temperatures stay in the 40s was pretty remarkable. I think that same year that I started, we had a blizzard where the snow drifted up and over the roof of my house on the one side. So I have lots of good memories of snowstorms, thunderstorms that knock down a lot of the many trees that are in that part of the country. Not really any tornado scares until I moved to Colorado and then here in Iowa.
But weren't you at Penn State during the '85 outbreak that was in Ohio and Pennsylvania?
That I have a weird story about that. I was part of Campus Weather Service, which at Penn State they have a group of students that would provide weather forecasts 4 times a day to about 12 radio station clients, and one of those clients was Kane, Pennsylvania. The 1985 tornado outbreak took place on May 31st, but spring semester ended earlier in May. So I was not actually at Penn State, and in fact, I took my first trip to Philadelphia to visit a roommate of mine from college, and I remember opening up the Philadelphia paper that morning, and that they had a little weather map of where the low pressure and the fronts were going to be at 7 p.m. that night. And I remember looking and thinking, wow, this would give tornadoes to western Pennsylvania. Later that night, around 11 p.m., when the local news came on in Philadelphia, they were talking about all these deaths and destruction in western Pennsylvania from a tornado outbreak. So I pretty much went as far away from it as I could be in Pennsylvania, so that kind of frustrated me. But an interesting story. So it turns out these students in meteorology at Penn State did the 8 p.m. update like they usually do with the weather forecast for Kane. And they told the radio broadcaster that there were tornadoes around and there was a very bad storm that looked like it was heading his direction. And that station would go off the air at sunset. They saw Penn State had an old WSR 57 radar from World War II. The students watched. They could see a hook echo and a tornado headed right for Kane, and so they actually called the DJ with a special phone call to have him warn the people in Kane that the tornado was coming. And while they were on the phone telling him this, the phone lines were cut down, and Kane took a direct hit. Several people died, but I think the governor of Pennsylvania actually gave a special commendation to the students. So that shows, no matter what level you are in meteorology, you actually have the knowledge that you can really save lives and have a big impact on people.
So then you weren't around for that. Maybe that was a good thing or a bad thing. And then after you were at Penn State, you went to Colorado State. What was your choice in going there? Was it Dr. Bill Gray at the time? He was there and I think still is.
Right. No, he was a nice guy. No, it was a surprise. I was convinced I was going to go to OU. I wanted to study tornadoes. I was hoping to work with Dr. Bluestein, but the day that I went to the professors at Penn State to ask for them to write letters of recommendation, all 3 that were my favorite professors told me that I should consider Colorado State instead. Oklahoma was really hurting at the time because of there was a collapse of the oil and gas industry. And in fact, OU, Howie Bluestein wrote me back and said he wanted to give me money, but he wasn't sure he would have it, so I would have to wait. Meanwhile, I had a friend at Penn State in meteorology a year older than me. He had already gone out there to grad school, and he was telling me about the amazing thunderstorms and the softball-sized hailstorms that would hit out there. And I thought, it would be really nice to see that part of the country with the big mountains. Fort Collins sounded like the perfect city. And so based on these professors telling me I could still study thunderstorms and severe weather at Colorado State, I applied there also and was accepted very quickly. and they treated me well, and I decided I would go out there instead. And I fell in love with Colorado, so I don't regret it. I'm sure I would have had a good time at Oklahoma, but I was able to do a lot of studying of thunderstorm systems and a lot of storm chasing out in Colorado.
Do you have any recollections of any storms during that time at Colorado State, both during your master's and your doctorate?
Yes, probably the most memorable storm was in 1992. It was the only time that I went on a multi-day chase. I think SPC was implying moderate or high risk, probably for 3 days in a row. So we chased on Sunday, June 14 that year in eastern Colorado, and it was a total bust. Nothing really. In fact, the only storms were up by Fort Collins, and we were hours away out on the eastern plains. Of course, I think anybody who chases has had a similar experience. But the next day was a high risk, and it was the infamous Beloit, Kansas HP supercell that blew up like an atom bomb early in the afternoon, and it produced, I think, 42 tornadoes from that one supercell from about 3 in the afternoon till almost midnight. So we lost track of how many tornadoes we saw. It was, somewhere over 10, but just amazing storm structure. The most incredible lightning display I've ever seen as it was getting dark. Some scary moments. It was the first time I had heard tornado sirens blowing. We watched a beautiful black tornado touchdown near Tipton, Kansas, and we were on the road, and a lot of the townspeople had fled south on the road and were with us. And as we're watching the tornado approach, you could hear the sirens go off in the town, and so that just kind of adds to the experience of a tornado chase. So that's one of my one of my favorite memories of tornado chasing out there.
Now, when you get your doctorate, you have to do a dissertation on it. What was yours? We're nosy.
Well, so I studied a very famous squall line thunderstorm system for my master's degree. It took place during a research project called Pre-Storm. So there were lots of special weather balloons taken and other measurements in Kansas and Oklahoma. For my PhD dissertation, I wanted to get some experience modeling because everything I did for my master's just dealt with working with observations. So I created a cloud model and modeled that squall line system to try to see what processes in the thunderstorm lead to some of the mesoscale jets that form, like the rear inflow jet that can help create bow echoes, the strong front to rear flow, etc. And I looked at a lot of the microphysics to see things like evaporation or sublimation. Do they play a very important role? Along with, say, condensation, what's really happening in the clouds in a thunderstorm system to help create these jets of mesoscale flow. So that, in 100 words or less, that's probably what my dissertation was about.
Yeah, and we have a lot of the problem with not knowing what storms are going to do, if they're going to bow here or here, and we still have that problem now. But yeah, keep going.
Right. Well, I was going to say, so it's interesting. In the last couple of years, my research at Iowa State, one of the components of the research has gone back into that very issue. So I have some students trying to take a look at why the computer models still do a terrible job for certain types of systems. As you mentioned, bow echoes are probably the worst. It seems our computer models do not produce bow echoes nearly enough. They also don't even do a very good job with squall lines that have a lot of trailing stratiform rain, the big areas of light rain with lots of positive cloud-to-ground strokes embedded in them. They don't produce enough of those. They also fail sometimes to turn broken lines of cells into an actual squall line, which means if you're a storm chaser, the computer models might be too optimistic. They might suggest that they're going to stay discrete supercells longer than they actually do. So we're trying to look in a lot of detail at many cases to figure out what is the reason, what is the main problem in the models, why this is happening.
And what is it? Because they're still doing it now. All
right.
of them are, that I can tell.
Exactly. Our work is like in progress. So I mean, we did one study, which was the one that showed what the biggest problem areas were.
Yeah.
We tried to look at it. We thought, well, maybe it depends on, in the model, how are you coding up the microphysics. But we discovered, at least for the case we looked at, that didn't really matter. You were having the same problems no matter which of these microphysical parameterizations you used in the model, and it actually seemed like the initial conditions played a role. That if you use the GFS model, you maybe got a better simulation than if you used the NAM model to feed. In our case, we used the WRF model, which of course is what the NAM actually uses at NCEP. So that's, I mean, that's very interesting. That suggests we need more observing sites out in the plains. We need more weather balloon launches. You know, that what ends up happening in the computer models is very sensitive to what it thinks is the actual state of the atmosphere.
And we just have not enough, especially in places like Nebraska or Kansas. I know Iowa, we have a large mesonet, but the storms, if you talk to storm chasers, well, storms don't form in Iowa, or they die here. I mean, we need to figure that out, because we've had this problem, I think, for years. And even today, I look at the HRRR, the rapid, the 4-kilometer NAM, 12-kilometer NAM, GFS. They all, like you said, they have this problem with they don't form squall lines, or the supercells stay for long periods of time, and it's just so annoying. That's like, well, how is anybody supposed to forecast anything when people are saying, well, it's going to do this? Well, none of the models are saying that.
Well, I know, we've had this happen a lot lately, but today was another example. This morning, we had thunderstorms and rain rolling into central Iowa, and I was looking at several models that are supposed to be pretty good, and they were all showing nothing happening in Iowa this morning.
Yeah, that's fail. And now there's a dog.
Yeah, and I see I've lost, I think, this signal here. Let me see.
I still hear you.
Okay, well that's good. I think it was just maybe the video, but
yeah, it'll come in and out when it wants to, because it's not foolproof at this point. But yeah, it would show like, and I've been looking at the models. Well, I haven't looked today because I've been busy, but you'd have storms. And then you look at the model at the time frame, because the models are so late, because they start like hours before, and it says nothing's here. Well, then it's obvious that model's wrong, so you might as well discount the whole thing. Because if you can't get the current weather right, then what says the 36 hours from now is right?
Exactly, and tonight's a good example. A lot of the models show a very narrow band of very intense rainfall, and it could be over Ames. It might just miss Ames and be a little bit to the north. I don't know how you would place any faith in exactly where it's going to be based on the models, considering they did not do a great job, this morning.
And even the amount, because I know you've worked on trying to do stuff with, will this storm produce a 1/10 of an inch, or is it going to produce 2 inches? I mean, when you can't get a model right for the current time frame, and you're saying, well, there's going to be 2 or 4 inches of rain, and I'm thinking, we've had so many times this year where we've had, oh, there's going to be lots of heavy rain, and then we get 1/4 of an inch. And I'm thinking,
right.
Ooh, that was heavy rain. Maybe they meant like 2 months later when we had 10 inches, but so.
Yeah, I've thought of exploring it. I'm convinced there's a high bias, even if you go with the official guidance that comes from the people in Washington, that look at all the models and then do the hand-drawn maps. There are so many times where they're showing we're going to have several inches of rain here. And I garden, so I pay special attention to that. I usually like for us to be getting enough rain that I don't have to water things. And there's so many times where we either miss it entirely or get hardly any. But then, like in late June, when I happened to be out of the country, so I missed a lot of the crazy weather you guys had. I get the impression then we probably were getting actually more rain than they thought.
From what I can remember, HPC had, I can remember it was one of the first times that I can ever remember in Iowa seeing 6
oh, wow, so they
for a 5-day. And I think most of the area had between 5 and 7 to 8. So I'm thinking, now that it's almost like you'd say, well, we missed this one, so let's lowball the next one, and then that's wrong. So then you keep upping, going down and up, and you're never getting into the middle. It's
right.
Yeah, I mean,
So
you can look, and even with precipitation, I mean, you could look out. I could look outside right now, and I'm opening my door. It is partly to mostly cloudy. I mean, how is the model going to tell us that it's going to be partly to mostly cloudy at 7:23 or 4 p.m. right now when it can't even say if it's supposed to rain at 10 o'clock, but there's nothing on radar or something like that? I mean,
Yeah, so
I'm seemingly going in circles, but
you had asked me earlier if the fact I was from Johnstown played much of a role in deciding to study heavy precipitation, and it played sort of a secondary role. The main reason I got into it is I was hearing people talk in the mid and late 90s that precipitation forecasts were horrible. They were so bad nobody wanted to even try to fix them, and so I thought, well, this sounds like a good area to start doing research in. And since I grew up in a place that was flooded so badly, I knew that yes, it was also a very important thing to try to study. I wrote a chapter for a book about a year or two ago, and it was interesting because I noticed if you look at winter, in 1995, the skill of winter precipitation forecast was pretty good. It was actually a lot better than summer. If you see how things have changed in almost 20 years, the skill of winter precip has gone up a lot more. So now winter forecasts are very, very good. The skill of summer precipitation forecast has barely budged. So the gap, it's almost like the income gap you hear everybody talking about in the U.S. It's kind of like the skill gap has gotten worse with time. We're not making very much progress at all with summer rainfall because it comes from thunderstorms, which are so hard to forecast correctly.
And up here, we get any storms at any time of the day. You get the nocturnal storms, you get the afternoon pop-up, you can get storms that form, hit the capping layer, and then collapse. And I mean, we can get thunderstorms anytime, anywhere, at all throughout the summer. And
Right.
and nocturnal storms tend to be different than afternoon popcorn storms.
Right. You talked about earlier how Iowa has the mesonet, which means we have a lot of surface data. The problem is the surface data will only really help you with your models if you have storms that would form during the afternoon that are basically being formed by the convergence, the winds colliding at the surface. Most of the rain that falls in Iowa happens in these nighttime systems, and these nighttime systems, there's nothing that shows up in the surface data to show why you're getting the storm. You actually need data from a couple thousand feet above the ground to really stand much of a chance of improving the nighttime forecasts. And we don't have that data. It would be way too expensive to launch weather balloons. Every county, every couple of hours. But
that maybe Iowa State should start doing that.
Somebody gives us a lot of money, we'd gladly do it.
Because I know Des Moines does not do balloons at the Weather Service. Would you rather have perhaps like let me think, a cooperation between Iowa State and the Weather Service in Des Moines to be able to launch balloons at least in the spring and summer during severe weather season?
That would be great. I think the problem is not so much a lack of people willing to do it. It's that the balloons are very expensive. And the National Weather Service has decided you only need balloons every 300 kilometers or so. So there's one in Omaha, of course there's one in Davenport, Minneapolis. So they're kind of spread out, and we don't really have any in the middle of Iowa. But there's no money that would be going to the Weather Service to do that.
But then you run into the problem. Well, the weather in Omaha is this, and the weather in Davenport is this. Well, there's something in the middle. I mean, you could have a frontal system. It's already past Omaha. Omaha has, let's say, 95 degrees, a dew point of 40. And in Davenport, the temperature is 77 degrees with a dew point of 60. Well, there's something there, but the balloon ain't going to see it. And that's kind of sad. And now I probably have just done a forecast for like a week from now, but I mean.
Well, and then the wind profilers were supposed to help a little bit, but I just read that I think at the end of this year the wind profiler network goes away for good, finally. So that means we're even stuck with less information in places like, at least in central Iowa we have a wind profiler in Slater, So that gives us a lot of good information every couple minutes of what's going on higher up. But that's going to be gone because it was not funded.
And so we could be in even worse shape. We're gonna not be able to forecast anything in the summer then.
Right, it could be that way. I hear there's lots of people working to make better use of satellite data,
Yeah.
maybe radar data. So, if they can find better ways to use that information, it could be trying to help the forecast, even though losing the wind profilers would be trying to hurt the forecast.
So there's between having to lose the wind profilers, not having balloons up, models being wrong. How is anybody getting any forecast right between April and September? Are they just pretty much throwing darts? It's almost like that's what it's coming to now.
Right. I mean, if you have weather systems that are bigger in scale, then you can normally do a pretty good job. Like this trough coming in over the next couple days. It's pretty big in scale, so the weather balloons that we have are probably going to do a pretty good job of showing, where the lift is going to be. But yeah, still getting down the exact location of the storms is going to be almost impossible.
And I know there's a lot of people they want to know right now when they wake up, is it going to rain at 2:35 p.m. and when I'm going to mow or whatever? And I don't think we're ever going to get to that, at least even in my lifetime, and I'm in my 30s. So
yeah, I think it'd be very hard to do that.
if they can do that, then we could probably throw a party and say, "Yay, we can forecast." Then they'll say, "Well, there'll be a tornado. How big will it be?" I mean, people are getting to the point they want to know every little detail, but you're not going to be able to do that because you're not going to know, well, this storm's going to dump an inch. Well, this one's not, and this one's going to throw a tornado out, and this one might, but this tornado, it may be small, but then it might be big. I mean,
Yeah, it seems like the best hope is in using what they call ensembles. Where you run lots and lots of different model runs at the same time, and then the information you can give to people ends up being in probability form. So, we realize we have a lot more skill if I say there's a 60% chance that Ames will have an inch of rain tonight. Maybe I ran 100 different models and 60 of them show over an inch of rain. It turns out that tends to work pretty well, but the big problem there is the American public is so used to being told it will rain or it won't. I mean, they somehow think they can be told exactly what's going to happen, and we realize we don't have that ability. We should have never really tried, probably. So we have to get people to think differently and realize if I tell you there's a 60% chance of over an inch of rain, and if you have something that would be destroyed if it got wet, then you should probably decide, okay, I'm going to take this inside, or I'm going to do whatever I need to. But with a 60% chance of rain, if it would cost you a lot of money to make a change, and it really wouldn't be that harmful if it got wet, you might decide on your own, okay, 60% is not high enough for me to risk this money. So people, you pretty much have to put the responsibility back on people. And do what we can honestly do, which is tell them the probability of what is going to happen. And in fact, I know SPC is looking at that for this warn-on forecast. So they'd be able to do things like this where they issue a tornado warning, and they would have maps that show, if you're in South Ames, there's a 70% chance that you will be hit by the tornado. If you're 20 miles north, it's only a 10% chance. So that, again, would mean if you run a nursing home, where it's going to take you a long time to get people to safety, you might choose to act for even a 10% chance. It's high enough that you'll go ahead and do things, but it would mean if all you need to do is run to your basement, you're not going to bother to do that if there's only a 10% chance. But you would probably wait and say, I will do that when it's like 50 or 70 or whatever. So I think the idea is, we can honestly do that and do a pretty good job, is give people probability numbers. The problem is we have to train the public, how they have to think and reason to use that kind of information.
And that's coming with the new warnings that have been out, where they start saying, "Oh, the world's ending," or And I mean, you have to because they're going to say, well, there's another tornado warning. Uh, so you have to tell these people it's going to be destructive. They got to tell people it's going to destroy everything and life-threatening. And I'm thinking sometimes are people even seeing these words? Because we've talked with several TV people and several have said they don't even read the warnings. They just
Right.
see the warning, they see the county, they see the time, that's all they think, and then they just go and ad lib. And it's nothing against them, but
Well, when the 300 and some people died back in 2011 on the April 27 outbreak, one of the things I thought was so frustrating is I'm sitting in my office at Iowa State, and every warning that was coming in, I was amazed because the warning would say, "This is a confirmed violent tornado. You know, it's a mile wide. You know, basically you will die if you're not in shelter." And yet the next day they're interviewing all these people in Mississippi and Alabama who said, "Oh, the sirens blew. They always blow, so we didn't do anything." So none of the information I was seeing, which I thought was going to be saving all these lives, none of it was getting to the people.
yeah. It seems like I think you may have watched our episodes. We've had like 5 episodes about April 27th.
Ah, well, it's a very interesting event. So,
What would happen if there was an well, we're kind of I'm going to try to lure us back to your time frame, but what would happen if there was like an April 27th in Iowa? Would everybody freak out that there was actually tornadoes or something?
I know when that event happened, I have a former student who lives in Huntsville, and you know, just hearing what their day was like, I mean, it almost sounds like, you know, a meteorologist's dream of how incredible that day was with like 5 or 6 rounds of tornado warnings, and um, you know, so that when the big event happened, a lot of people didn't even have power anymore from the earlier events. And
Yeah.
I tried to figure, could that ever happen in Iowa? I don't think it could. I think there's that part of the country, the southeast up into the Ohio Valley. I think that's the one area where you can have these mega outbreaks set up, like what happened on April 27. I don't really think there's ever been anything like that in Iowa, and I don't know that there could be.
And I know who you're speaking of. I think you're speaking of Andy Kula, who's at the Weather Service in Huntsville.
Well, he's there, so yeah, I know him too. This is actually Elise Johnson, so she's
Okay, yeah, the other one.
a lightning researcher down there.
Okay. I know Andy was and I think at ISU.
He was a weather service person in Des Moines for a while, and he took a few classes at Iowa State, but I think
Okay.
his degrees are from Kansas.
Oh, then we hate him.
Yeah.
I knew he was in Des Moines for a long time, so I was like, okay, that's who it is. But we'll digress. But after you graduated from Iowa State, Colorado State with your PhD, you went to NCEP for about almost 2 years. What was that like there?
Um, that was fun. You know, when I went to NCEP, many young people that I knew in meteorology said if they would just move NCEP to a different area, people would work there for free. You know, it was kind of like a dream place to go if you liked weather forecasting and you had done some modeling. However, it sat in Camp Springs, Maryland, which was an area where people would be mugged in the parking lot of the building of the the federal buildings. So it was not a very nice area to be located, but it was an interesting place. I enjoyed being there. I was doing modeling work, and I felt like the only weather geek American on the entire modeling floor. It was mostly mathematicians from Serbia and other countries. Um,
Oh,
so it
brother.
was, yeah, I kind of missed having much interaction with people. So for me, it was a good thing because it really helped me to realize I definitely wanted to be a professor so that I could have the interaction with students, which I think makes my life exciting and fun.
And less stressful.
More stressful probably, but more fun. So I'm willing to take the extra stress to have much more social interaction.
So you were there for almost 2 years before you finally decided to get out of the bad end of the Weather Service neighborhood to come over to the lovely plains of Iowa. We have no clue why.
Yeah, it was one of those things. You know, it was a postdoc, and when you take a postdoc, you're told it's, in my case, it was a 2 year. postdoc, and so I could see the end of the 2 years was coming up. It sounded like NSEP would have been able to find a way to keep me there, but they had not been able to hire people as civil servant, as government employees in forever. And so that would mean you'd be hired under a contractor with soft money, which didn't sound the greatest. Washington was so expensive. I never thought I'd own a new car or my own house if we lived there. So I pretty much, as soon as faculty positions started opening up in meteorology, I just started to apply, and really the first one that opened up was Iowa State. Another one opened up at Penn State, which was a place I was really thinking would be fun to get back to since I have family not too far away from there. So yeah, I ended up interviewing at both places in the same week, and it was really funny. I knew nobody in Iowa, so I felt like there was no pressure on me for the interview at Iowa State. I was kind of relaxed because I didn't really care a whole lot how it went. The Penn State interview was much more stressful for me because my wife and I kept thinking, oh, it'd be so wonderful to be back there. But when I was at Ames, I really fell in love with the way people were here. And when I was at Penn State for the interview, it was a totally different experience. It was much more formal and uptight. And so Iowa State offered me the job very quickly, and Penn State was kind of stalling and taking a longer time period. So I decided we would move to a place where we had no family within 1,000 miles, so we came to Iowa.
And you've been here for 19 years. So it's evident you don't want to leave now, I'd assume.
No, Ames is if you look at all these surveys, it's often considered one of the best cities in the country, and we love it here. We have tons of great friends. Our kids loved their school, so there came one point where Penn State was advertising that they wanted to hire faculty members at all levels. So even though I was a tenured professor, I could have left and maybe gone there. And it was like something we had been waiting for when we were fairly new out here. But by the time that happened, we mentioned it to the kids, and there was no way they wanted to leave their schools here in Ames, and we were pretty attached. So we decided we'd stay. And we're still happy here.
Yeah, I ended up going to Iowa State for a year, and I liked it except for that. And I was in the meteorology department. Unfortunately, calculus killed me, so
yes,
that's the end of that.
Calculus causes lots of problems for lots of people.
I hated calculus. But because I know you were there at the time, because I was a freshman at Iowa State in the fall of '99.
Okay.
So I was there before they decided to build all the buildings around the agronomy building. That built the new building down there. I don't remember what it is now, but I remember the meteorology department and now we're kind of getting off on my thing again. The meteorology department, from what I can remember back then, it may still be the case today, it was kind of all over the place. It was like in the agronomy building, it was in Science 1, and I think Science 2, and I think your office was in Science 1 at the time.
Mine's been in agronomy, but our department main office is in Science 1. So
okay.
To do official business, sometimes you have to go over there.
Which is annoying, but that's where all the stuff is on top of the agronomy building. And surprisingly enough, it's been hit by a tornado.
Right,
so
right.
You have that. You wouldn't have gotten that at Penn State.
No, that's true.
You wouldn't have had tornadoes hitting the university, even though it was a weak tornado, and it occurred at a weird time. It was like noon or something.
Yeah, and some students and I were almost we took some students up onto the roof, and we were watching this bow echo roll into Ames, and the sky turned about as green as I've ever seen, and so we were joking about, okay, this green sky, but it's just a bow echo. The only reason we were off the roof was, thankfully, it started to rain. So we came down the stairs. I had just gotten back in my office, and then the tornado hit. I was watching out my windows, and the wind started getting extremely strong, and the trees were bending so much that I finally actually thought, I better get out into the hallway. I thought my windows were going to explode. And as soon as I got out into the hallway, a grad student of mine came running up the steps and said, a tornado just hit. It took all the trees out of the courtyard, and he was right there watching when it happened. So that was when I realized, wow, it's a good thing I you'd think a tornado chaser would just stare out the window the whole time, but luckily my common sense kicked in that, boy, these winds were really strong, and the window was likely going to blow in. It turned out it was actually the tornado passing across our wing of the agronomy building.
And that was in 2005, the year of tornadoes all
Right.
in the fall.
2 months before the real, much more impressive tornadoes hit on the football Saturday.
Yeah, in November of all places, you can talk about all these odd tornado outbreaks we've had of late, even though that was 9 years ago. But it seems like last year we had one in October. We had one in November.
Yeah.
What is this like becoming a pattern that we're going to start having to worry that we're going to have a spring tornado season, and then we're going to have like what they have in the southeast where they have a fall tornado season? Are we going to have to start worrying about that now?
I know the people. I have lots of friends in Oklahoma, and Oklahoma has always had a second season. They call it second season in September, October, and they used to, ask if we had one, and it was like, for some strange reason we didn't, but we probably should, because it seems like the same reasons why they get a spike down in the southern plains should happen in Iowa. So, part of me just thinks it's like the climatology, that things are trying to average out, that we had a long period without much. I mean, we know we do get tornadoes sometimes in October, like the Belmont, which I think was, if I read it correctly, it was like the only F5 in the United States to happen in October, and it happened here in Iowa.
You know I was going to bring this out because there it is.
Ah, okay, yeah. Wasn't that in the 60s?
It was in 66. Yeah. It was on a Friday during homecoming.
Which almost happened this year. The October outbreak, the models really showed Iowa getting hammered, and it was a Friday. And I think a lot of the high schools actually postponed or altered the game times that day because of fear that there would be a lot of severe weather.
They even did that clear on this side of the state, and we didn't get any storms until way later. But they were freaking out that there was going to be storms blowing everywhere. Another case of models don't know what they're. It's another case of models said this and it didn't happen, except it was way worse. Because what are models going to think? Because don't they kind of tend toward climatology? They're not saying, oh, it's October, there shouldn't be EF4 tornadoes in Nebraska.
Well, only things like moss would tend toward climatology because it's statistical and they actually feed. But yeah, the main models we use don't, they're basically a chunk of the atmosphere working in your computer, so they don't know anything about climatology really, other than the amount of sunlight coming in to hit the ground. So they should be able to show extremes when they happen.
Yeah, the one thing that I always find kind of odd is when, like this next week, we're going to have this big cold, I'll use the term nobody likes, polar vortex that's coming, and everybody's thinking, when you talk about polar and you're talking July, that doesn't seem to mix, right? I don't know why that's the case, but people are thinking that they'll say, well, there's a polar vortex coming, that means it's going to snow. And I'm thinking, if it snows in July, we got problems.
Right.
So,
No, it should be beautiful weather. It'd be the kind of weather the last few summers we would have paid big money just to have a few days like we're going to have next week.
I don't want 100. 2012 was the, and I keep telling people, 2012 for me, because I grew up through the drought years in the 80s, because I've been in a native Iowan all my life. I grew up in the 80s, the drought years. 87, 88 was really bad. When in 88 it was 95 to 105, even up to almost 110 for almost like a whole month. Only 2012 rivals that, from what I can remember, where it was like above 96 or 7 for, I think, the whole month of July, and it didn't rain. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this was 88 all over again. Because I know I've heard that they say, and I can't remember who said this, it was, I think, in the agronomy department at Iowa State, who said that droughts tend to be in cycles of about every 25 years or so. And so 25 years from 1988 would have been 2013, which in yes, yes, would have been 2013. Well, 2012, well, it's a year. But then we had the flood of 2008, and then this the all the river water we had this year was almost rivaling that because we had some record flooding on some rivers that was
Right.
beating records from 93 even. And we can talk about 2008 because that was pretty much the year we had all the weather, and then we had 2 years of no weather. So
Right, and then there was also, of course, 2010 in parts of the state. I mean, in this area, right in the middle of the state, 2010 was more amazing than 2008 with the amount of flooding. And I had over 30 inches of rain in the 3 summer months in 2010. We
you
actually
know
had tree frogs that we would find climbing up the window next to our door with their little suction cups, and made me feel like we lived in the jungle by the time August was done.
I remember in 93, I think the eastern part of Iowa had 45 inches in a 3 month period, and I thought, well, we'll never see flooding like 93 again. Hope they didn't see 2008 coming, which was way worse.
Right.
Except in the Des Moines area where it was not as worse. It was just worse where I'm at.
Yeah, Eastern Iowa got it really bad in '08. Des Moines wasn't. I mean, Des Moines came pretty close to having big problems, but it wasn't quite as bad as '93.
When you do the thing with the precipitation with the storms, this storm, this storm, this storm, when you have, let's say, like a 2008 type event where you have the winter before, it just snows and snows and snows and snows and snows, and then all of this melts, the rivers are then high, and then you have to worry, okay, now we're going to get something, let's, for example, the last 2 weeks come, or last 3 weeks, where then all the rivers go running out of their banks. And is that something you'd have to think about when we're, and I'm kind of making this sound like a question, it may sound like a rant or something or other, but where you have to take into consideration where the rivers are, how much moisture is still in the soil, et cetera, et cetera.
The weather models do have to know how much moisture is in the soil, so that's there's not a lot of good observations for that, but whatever there is, does get put into the models. So from the weather side of things, there's not really much of a problem. The people that run the flood models on the rivers, they're the ones that have to know better how much moisture is in the soil, so they know how much rain is going to run off. They also have to know, very clearly, what the current levels of the rivers are, which will probably be pretty high if you've had a lot of snow melt, and also what the groundwater level is. So yeah, the hydrology people have to worry a lot more about, if you just got done with a very snowy winter. On the weather side of things, where we're just forecasting the rain, we're not really affected, too much by what ended up happening over the winter.
So then we'll kind of skew ahead slightly about, let's say, here comes big storm complex, theoretically coming into Nebraska. Okay, Iowa, the soil is dry. Well, it isn't this year, but there were theoretically. So could you be able to tell at this moment if that storm complex is going to dump rain, or if the dry soil is going to, which would tend to make the air above it somewhat dry, would kill the storm or kill most of the rain? Would you be able to forecast that with some relative ease?
You should be able to, because assuming that you have some of the data points, that you have some observations that show you that, yeah, the soil is drier in Iowa, that would be in the model. So the model is going to show the soil moisture being drier in Iowa. And as long as your codes, as long as the way you've created your model is doing a good job of showing how fast moisture comes out of the soil or doesn't, yeah, then your computer model should actually be able to, to know what's going on in the real atmosphere and probably show that the precip falls apart as it moves into Iowa if it was really dependent on the evaporation of water into the air from the ground.
So it'd be similar to like saying a hurricane moving ashore.
Yeah, I guess in a very loose way, yeah.
Loose sense. Unlike a hurricane going over, say, the Everglades, where it's somewhat wet and it's swampy. I'm
Right.
not saying our soil is swampy because well, it was a week or so ago, but it ain't now. At least not as bad as it was. But
Right.
so we have, what other research stuff are you into right now that can't think of because I had the thing up, but now I can't remember what else you were. I know you were had stuff about tornadoes or
Right.
whatnot, which involves this book, but because
That.
I ended up buying this on, gosh, what was it? I think I bought it on eBay for like $28.
Huh. And
This
I
is the
I
second edition. I didn't buy the first, thank God. I got the second.
I think that one was written by John Stanford, who he used to be an atmospheric physics professor at Iowa State. He retired about 10 to 15 years ago, but he had told me I should update the book. I haven't gotten around to doing that, but yeah, maybe I should do that one of these years.
Yeah, I could read through this. It needs to be updated. For example, because you could probably find lots of stuff in here. A lot of it, it's I'd probably have to go see through this because there's lots of pictures that you could add to it. Since this was done in '87, so the
Okay.
last year that was in here was '86.
Wow, I think you're
So
giving me a good idea for maybe I should do a sabbatical and write a new version of that book. Although there haven't really been that many impressive tornado events since '87. I know about the '95. The Memorial Day event was pretty interesting with the multiple F4s on the ground at the same time, and Parkersburg stands out. Um, and I guess Mapleton would be a good one to add.
and probably the outbreak in last October for the fact of how rare it was.
Right, way up in far northwest Iowa, there was some very serious damage that happened.
I know the tornado outbreak in 2001, the one that had the most tornadoes in Iowa in a day, that was in 2001. Those were low top storms, though. That was
Right.
and that one killed two people at the community center in Agency outside of Tumwa. I remember that clearly. But the storms, I think, from that one, and we could talk about all these outbreaks because we have lots of time. The tops of those storms, because I did a blog post about that outbreak where some of the tops were only like 20,000 feet or 25,000, and it was
Yeah, that was
it looked like a armband coming up like a hurricane. It looked so strange.
that
Of
was
course,
one of
it was
these
April, but
big, cold closed lows in April, and we couldn't get a whole lot of warmth and moisture up into Iowa, which is always a problem in April. So the storms were an incredible shear, but there wasn't that much cape, and so we got a lot of these nice low-topped supercells, every one of which I think was spinning pretty heavily.
if I remember, I think every storm it was like in a semi-squall line with little cells kind of butting up against each other, but almost every single one I think was spinning. I don't know, think
Right,
if every single one had a tornado with it, but I think many of them did. They
right.
weren't long-lasting ones, though. I think the
No,
agency one lasted quite a while, but I
because
can remember. Go ahead.
I was just saying there was like a warm front or a stationary front that was coming up, and the storms were kind of they would tornado as the storm crossed the front, but
Yes.
very very quickly it would be into the cold air on the north side of the front, and then
And
it
then
would
it would
die.
elevate. Yeah. Because I always think of it as this: here comes storm. It's surface based. Here it comes. It hits the cold air, and it's like it chops off the bottom half, and the base just goes up. That's how I always had known it, where it just chops off. It's like a slicer. It just slices off the bottom, and that's the end of that. You may get a funnel cloud. You may get a wall cloud. You'd have to have the skinniest, long tornado to even get close to the ground at that point.
Right. The problem there is that cold air near the ground is very heavy and stable, and so if
Yeah.
the thunderstorm is trying to send down a downdraft to create a lot of wind, it's like trying to shove your fist into a pillow. You like never make it down to the ground. So yeah, the only type of severe weather normally that you can get once the storm is elevated is hail. In fact, hail might actually like that scenario, as long as you still have a lot of warmth and moisture feeding in higher up. you have a good bit of elevated cape, so you get the updrafts to create the hailstones. But now when the hail's falling, it's going to fall through this cold, air near the ground, so it's going to melt more slowly. So that can make it a little easier to have big hail reach the ground.
So, but then nowadays, do models have the tendency to be able to say, well, this storm's elevated, this could produce hail. I'm going right back into this again.
This is, yeah, in fact, this is a good thing to talk about because I'm going to be the lead forecaster next June and July. There's a big research project taking place in the Plains. It's going to be based out of Hays, Kansas. And it's called PECON, the Plains Elevated Convection at Night Experiment.
Oh, so, goody.
Yeah, people have realized that this is a weak area in the models, and there's a lot we don't understand about, how are we getting storms forming, elevated storms that sort of like pop up at 10 o'clock at night, and we have no idea what's forming them. We have no idea how they organize. We know they create things called bores, which are really fascinating, like, these waves that propagate outward from, yeah. In fact, in Iowa, about I think in May 2013, we had a beautiful bore event. Like at 8 in the morning, there were storms up near Mason City, and what a bore looks like, if you're outside watching, is it looks like a cigar, a roll cloud. You might get 1, 2, or 3 of these, and they just race.
I can remember seeing. I think it was that where you had the big roll cloud, and then you'd have like the waves that you could see from the gravity waves that were coming too. I can remember that where you'd see and I can remember seeing this on the camera. I think it was from Iowa State. We see a roll cloud, and here comes the next one, and the next one.
Right.
And I was like, well, that's weird. I can remember we've had some like fascinating shots of storms coming in at weird times. I was like 8 or 9 or 10 o'clock, and here comes this big, nasty, ominous thing. And I think that's kind of a bit odd to see stuff at 8 or 9 or 10 o'clock when the atmosphere is pretty much about the most stable at that time of the day, especially.
And that's actually what and you need that stable air to get a bore or a gravity wave. It's basically the same thing if you took a rock and you tossed it into a pond and you see the ripples come out. When there's cool, stable air near the ground and a thunderstorm pushes its outflow outward, it's kind of like dropping a rock in the pond, and then you see the waves come out. So in some cases in the plains, when those bores move away from storms, they can actually trigger new storms. And so this research project is going to have lots and lots of special instruments out there that are able to look a little bit above the ground. And so we're hoping to learn a lot in the project about that might help us to improve the models and to forecast thunderstorms at night better.
And how these storms evolve and then move. Because I've noticed with nocturnal storms, it seems like the minute the sun peaks above the horizon, the nocturnal storms die. And I'm thinking, okay, the sun heats the atmosphere. How is the sun killing it? Is it because there's no cape and now the sun's out, so it's almost like it's a capped atmosphere at that point? I've always wondered about that. I never got that far into the meteorology department to learn that.
It's actually more of a coincidence. It's that the storms that affect Iowa at night are there because they need the low-level jet. So the low-level jet is, this river of very warm, humid air that's coming up from the south and the west. And as the night goes on, it moves clockwise, so it starts to swing around. And as it's doing that, it also ends up weakening. In fact, there's a lot of complicated things happening in the low-level jet. But normally about the time the sun rises is when the low-level jet is rapidly falling apart. So it's sort of like they're two unrelated things. They, if you see, okay, the sun has now come up, it's after sunrise, the storms are falling apart. It really has nothing to do with the fact the sun is up. It actually has everything to do with the fact that the low-level jet is dying at that point in time.
And then sometimes, if the low-level jet is like really strong, it could keep the storms going a little longer into the morning before it finally dies.
Right.
But at that point, if you have a strong low-level jet at night, you're probably getting lots of severe thunderstorm warnings, probably even maybe 1 or 2 tornado warnings at that point, even at 2 or 3 or 4 in the morning.
Right.
If it's just a general MCS that forms by 2, 3, 4 in the morning, it's pretty much stratiform at that point. Thunder, lightning, rain, or known as boring to a weather person.
Right, right. But good
So,
for the crops. So
well, yeah, except that the crops this year, it's the last 2 years. Oh, we need rain, we need rain, 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 rain. This year, now we don't want rain, or the crops are all being flattened by wind, or damaged by hail, or damaged by tornadoes. So you can't. It seems like they just can't catch a break with that. And I'm hoping with the storms today, if I'd have my radar up, but we've had a few showers around. But it seems like this is going to be another case of nocturnal activity again. I'm rolling my eyes about that because I don't like staying up waiting for this. But
yeah, I think to me it looked like it may not really kick in until midnight, give or take a few hours. So
yeah, no, no going out at midnight for you.
no, I'm still jet lagged from my trip, and so that's one reason I didn't even think to storm chase last Sunday night.
Okay, we can be nosy. Where were you?
We were in Italy having the best trip of our lives.
Oh, it's
So
your vacation then.
well, yeah, we spur of the moment last August we decided to host a foreign exchange student. We had heard there were apparently if you're a female high schooler you get people want you, but if you're a male, it was 2 weeks before school was starting. We were told there were 72 boys that had wanted to come to the United States, but they couldn't. Just decided spur of the moment that we would take in a high schooler who was from Italy, and he was the perfect kid for my family. We really loved the guy, and so when March came, we decided that once he headed back in early June, we would go out there in late June and see Italy. His family took the entire 2 weeks off and took us everywhere in the country, so we got to meet them. It was the best trip that I expect I will have ever had in my entire life. So I don't mind being
I
jet lagged.
I suppose you took your weather diary and decided to do the weather there.
No, instead I filled it in after the fact by using other sources so that I didn't have a gap for Ames. I
Yes, but
knew
I'm talking
Italy would
about
not
your
have the most.
the weather when you were in Italy.
Oh yeah, but the weather in Italy is generally very nice this time of year. Although I do have to say, when we landed in Milan, they were having some pretty fierce thunderstorms. So the streets were actually flooding, and there were a lot of close CGs around. So I thought that was a very appropriate welcome to Italy for us
Oh,
landing.
so when you left, they decided to throw a thunderstorm in too?
Well, that was when we arrived, but when we left, it was actually funny that you would mention that. When we left, we had beautiful weather until we got to New York, where we had our layover. And this was last Thursday when there were severe thunderstorm watches up and down the East
Uh,
Coast, severe storms. So our Thursday evening flight back to Des Moines was canceled. And you know it's a bad sign when the flight attendant looks for 10 minutes and then basically tells you, is there another airport you can fly into? So we were pretty much told there was no way to get us into the Midwest for 2 more days. So we rented a car at LaGuardia and drove 18 hours straight to get home to Ames.
Yikes.
Already being severely jet lagged, I had vowed I would never be caught dead in a car driving in New York City. But if you look at a map to see where LaGuardia is, it's on the east side of New York City, and if you want to get to the rest of the country, you have no choice. So I drove through Manhattan at rush hour.
Oh my God.
So I guess that may be one of these weird bucket list items. I can now say I actually did that. I don't really ever want to do it again, but I did it.
You probably would have been, I don't want to start saying this, you would have probably been better off taking, or trying to get from LaGuardia to, let's say, Penn or Penn Station and take Amtrak as far as you could west. Because I've taken Amtrak. Now we're getting into personal non-weather stuff. I've taken Amtrak from Chicago to New York before. Oh, it was
Right.
so nice, but
We would have, the problem is though, I guess we would have got stuck in probably what is it, Osceola, with our cars sitting at the airport in Des Moines. So this way, we were able to drive the rental car right back to the airport and then get our real car and go back to Ames.
yeah. I mean, yeah, Des Moines needs Amtrak, please. But so, I mean, what else? Well, we can talk about the more tornadoes. Because I mean, I I used to check this book out like all the time. I think I like half owned it when I was in school. It's so sad, and it's so old.
But it's the only book I know that's about Iowa tornadoes, so that's why it's kind of special.
Yeah, it's like, well, it's too thin. It needs to be bigger. Look,
We
it's
need to have more.
thin.
We need to have more exciting tornadoes in Iowa for that to happen.
Or just get more, well, pictures. I mean, I can look at this. Let's see. It says, wait a minute. I want to read some of this because this is bound to be funny. Okay, wait, it actually has. This is funny. This needs to be edited. In motels, lie down in the lowest level interior hallway away from glass. Dive under a bed or pull a mattress on top of you as last resort. Why would they put motels in? That's kind of strange.
Yeah, that is a little bit odd.
Okay, this is number 5. We may talk about this. In a vehicle, drive away at a right angle to storm movement.
That's um, I mean, that's actually good advice, but there's a lot of debate about, the public. I mean, it's kind of hard because the average person may not know what direction it's moving.
Ooh dear, I'm trying to get the. Wait a minute. There it is. It's hard to read it, but it's right there. It says, "Do not get caught in your vehicle." Well, then don't drive. That's kind of odd.
But I mean, this gets to the thing most people remember is that they say get in a ditch. If you're in a car and you see a
Which
tornado,
is
get in a ditch.
which is also in there. And speaking of this, because I know you knew Tim Samaras, because I did read about
Yes.
that. You can talk about him, about what he was like when he was around, because I know he did a lot of work with a lot of the students at Iowa State.
Yeah, Tim was a good friend. He was an amazing guy. I was absolutely stunned when the accident happened. When he was caught in the tornado. He was the most safe person I knew. He was always looking out for the students. We joke. When he first told me that he wanted to take a student team out, I remember thinking, "Oh my goodness, what about the liability?" Blah blah blah. But he made it really clear that he would never have the students with him in the car that had to deploy the probes into the tornado. Instead, they were always used for the mesonet cars, which would stay, a mile or two away, which wasn't necessarily always safe. They had some interesting stories from time to time, but yeah, he basically did everything to look out for other people. Yeah, he was the. I told people after it happened that probably getting to work with him was the highlight of my career, and I don't really think I will ever get to have as good a time working with somebody in the future either. Just a super incredibly nice guy, no ego, just always thinking of other people. Very smart. He'd be in the lab at Iowa State with us, and we would need ways to try to measure tornado winds better, and he would have a million ideas, and he would know exactly how to engineer the new instruments to try to create ones that would work well to tell us the winds and tornadoes. Always very excited guy. I had a lot of times where I got to drive him from Iowa State down to Des Moines for the National Weather Association conference, where we often had him as an invited speaker. It was just like a good friend. We would just talk about all sorts of things. So it was really extremely tough. That week was perhaps one of the worst weeks of my life.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that have said that, because there was a lot of people that were caught off guard by that tornado in El Reno. And it seems funny that this year Oklahoma is having almost no tornadoes this year. It seems ironic that it put all the power of tornadoes in Oklahoma last year for then this year to be somewhat quiet. Seems kind of ironic.
Yeah, Oklahoma had a bunch of years recently that it seemed like they were the place to be for big tornadoes. So again, it seems, climatologically they were due for probably a couple years of break because they had some very active years. It kind of made you think that there was something special that they would be getting hit every single year. So it's kind of nice that they'll have a break. At least this year, nothing much going on down there.
Yeah, but then it seems like when they have a break, they have drought. At least this year, they're not having that. It's
Yeah,
been
this year they've
fairly,
been pretty lucky.
yeah, and they're going to get the a lovely cool down. I see that they're going to get out of the near century mark down into the 70s. They're probably going to think it's time for football. They'll
And it looks
probably
like they're
play football. They'll play a football game. They'll probably get Oklahoma and Oklahoma State to play their football game now or something.
and it actually looks like they're going to get a good bit of rain, so it'll be cool and rainy, whereas we're going to be cool and sunny probably.
Yeah, but then you get the afternoon clouds because in the summer, heat from the sun doesn't matter if it's 70
Right.
degrees. The afternoon
Yeah,
comes, here come the cumulus clouds.
I would
See,
guess we could have some pop-up showers, a couple days this week because it's going to be so cold up high in the atmosphere.
and it's going to be in the 40s at night, and it's going to feel like let's get out football and start playing. Let's start doing the Iowa State football game now, because it'd be our luck. It'd be when Iowa State play, it'll be like 90 or something, and it's like, well, in July it was 68. Because that's another thing we could, because I'll try to get this because you've been on for over an hour. About now I just lost track of what I was going to say. Oh darn! It'll come to me after about 2 hours from now.
Yeah.
But crap, and I said crap. Darn! Now I've just lost my train of thought. I'll figure it out probably by next week's program at the rate we're going. But I'll think of it and I'll email.
Okay.
And then we'll do that. But okay, we're going to get to the point where we have to share stuff. It's our shout outs where we shout out anything from a book to a person to whatever. So I'll do my shout out, this book, which I'm hoping my guest updates soon.
Yeah.
Because this tornado, which tornado was this? I'm trying to think, which one was this? Tell me which one this was. Wait a minute, whoa, it's telling me. Okay, this tornado is from the same day as the Jordan tornado.
Ah,
It's from Perry, the same day.
wow.
So, and I'll also shout out that, Dr. Fujita there's a video of him talking about the Jordan tornado, and I did a post about this on our website, iawx.net, which was actually iowawx.com when I had my site, but it's now on the new site, where I discussed the Jordan tornado, how it went like this, and then it made a sharp turn, and then went like that, because and I saw this on that video, where something came out of an outflow, it's almost like an outflow boundary, kind of started pushing the tornado from almost a north to slowly north-northwest, and then it just turned and went east-southeast, and the anticyclonic tornado did the same thing, and I was like, that was cool, because that tornado had the weirdest path ever.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I think that still is the tornado that had the strangest path that I've seen.
Outside of probably El Reno, which is, this storm is going this way, now it's going this way. And I think that's what caught out a lot of people like Tim. The tornado is moving east-southeast, and then it starts accelerating to the northeast, and then it starts moving east again. Because I watched the live coverage of that. I watched it live, and it's on YouTube. And the TV weather, the meteorologists were going, well, we don't know where this tornado is going. It's wobbling everywhere. It looks like it. And they started comparing it to a hurricane that wobbles. That was the first time I could ever remember a tornado being compared to a hurricane that wobbled. And it was kind of moving in all sorts of directions. So, what's your shout out?
Yikes! You didn't prepare me for this.
If it's against the people that, well, we won't mention them. And I know I could probably get there, but my co-host, who may be watching this now or later, will probably get mad if I discuss a couple of students of yours.
No. I don't know what I would shout out, to be very honest. I'm still jet lagged. I use that as my excuse.
What airline was it?
It was Delta. So,
then shout out everybody but them.
Yeah, although I don't think they actually treated us pretty nice. As long as they give us a pretty big refund for the unused part of the flight, I'll be happy with them. But I think all the airlines were canceling. In fact, we almost didn't get a rental car. The first 5 of the 6 agencies that were there said there was not a single rental car left in New York City.
Okay. You would have liked New York. All you would have had to do.
So I know who I'll shout out. I'll shout out National Car Rental. They're the one agency that was smart enough that when they said there weren't any cars for 1 or 2 day rentals, they thought ahead and said, well, we have 3 and 4 day rentals, and so I think we would have done anything to get home. So we took a 4-day car rental, even though we knew we were going to just do it all in 1 day. So go National.
Oh, brother. You would have been better off probably spending the night in New York and then taking a flight out of Newark or something. Would you have been
Yeah.
able to go out of Newark? Because I think there's flight.
I think the agent was really looking, and it might be that Delta does not fly out of Newark. And I asked her if we could be put on another airline, but she said when it's weather-related problems, they are not allowed to put you on another airline because it's very likely the other airlines are canceling their flights too. And then apparently that would just really screw up the system because, be like, okay, then who is responsible at that point for you? And, in this case, because we drove, we hopefully can get a refund for that segment. But if we had been switched to United and United canceled, then who owes us the money? So yeah, I think there wasn't much else that could be done.
So National Car Rental, I never rented from them. I'm going to say boo to Avis in New Haven, Connecticut, because they screwed me over. But when I was in Connecticut once. But thank you, Dr. Gallus, for being on and putting up with me and putting up with this program. We might have to have you on next summer with the pecan the thing, because now we want to know where these nocturnal storms are going. We want to know stuff because we're getting sick of not having models done right.
Right. Well, keep me in mind. I'll be away half of June and half of July out in the field to be with the project, so it'll be a hectic summer.
We can do it right from we can do it live from a corn or wheat field in Kansas if we had to.
But being a lead forecaster, we had a practice run a couple weeks ago, and it's a lot of work. There really won't be time is the bigger issue. So.
Yeah, and at least in this case now they're getting to the point. Well, we've had all these research things about storms during the day. Now, finally, let's do storms at night. I hate to think if you end up getting a tornado at night from this. Right, this would be a little bit. But, okay, this has been the Polygon Show Issuance number 18. We do this every Friday night at about 7 o'clock, give or take, whenever our guests want to come. Next week, we have somebody. I don't know. It's people that my co-host came up with, but we'll put that on the website. So thanks again, Dr. Gallus, and we'll see you next week. Have a good weekend. Try to stay dry. Enjoy the cool weather. God bless. Goodbye.
Thanks, Jeff.